Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western Literary Canon out loud. Today we begin journal collection number 57, dating from the year 1866. Emerson will turn 63 years old in May of this year, and as always, we begin with an editorial biographical update. Early in January, Mr. Emerson set forth for his lecturing tour in the West. He no longer had the difficult task of arranging this, which was done for him by some agency, a great relief and advantage. The conditions of travel were now more comfortable, yet the work was arduous. He was away from home till February 19th, lecturing in New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, and Wisconsin. However, he almost invariably returned rather refreshed and stimulated by his winter experiences in the advancing West. End note. There is an inscription at the beginning, which many of his journal collections contain, and like many of these, the author has given us the English translation, so I will read it. The uttered word flies away, the written character abides. January 5th, 1866. I thought last night, as so often before, that when one has a task before him in which literary work becomes business, undertaken, that is, for money, any hearing of poetry or any intellectual suggestion, as, for example, out of J. Hutchinson Sterling's book lately, brings instant penitence, and the thoughts revert to the muse, and under this high invitation we think we will throw up our undertaking and attempt once more this purer, loftier service. But if we obey this suggestion, the beaming goddess presently hides her face in the clouds again. We have not learned the law of the mind, cannot control and bring at will or domesticate the high states of contemplation and continuous thought. Neither by sea nor by land canst thou find the way to Hyperboreans. Neither by idle wishing nor by rule of three or thumb. Yet I find a mitigation or solace of the alternative, which I accept, of the paid lectures, for instance, by providing always a good book for my journey, as Horace or Martial, or The Secret of Hegel, some book which lifts quite out of prosaic surroundings, and from which you draw some lasting knowledge. In the funeral of Steele, Sable, and the undertaker reproaches the too cheerful mute. Did I not give you 10, then 15 and 20 shillings a week to be sorrowful? And the more I give you, I think the gladder you are. February. Common sense. Lord Mansfield, or any great lawyer, an example of it, though they call it law. And Beau Brummel even surprised other fops by having this basis, as when he was asked what sense he used for his linen, replied, country air and country washing. Love. The maiden only need consider that she passes securely through 10 or a dozen appearances, as in the street or at an evening party. The lover will do all the rest, since he is ever working up, enriching, enhancing her image and attributes with the smallest aid from her, so that thus there are two working on her part and none on his. The power of manners is a principal agent in human affairs. The rich and elegant and the strong-willed not so much talk down as look down and silence the well-disposed middle class. 'Tis fine that the scholar or the red republican defies these people or writes against them. He cannot get them out of his thoughts. When he meets them in the street he cannot deny them his bow, and when he meets them in clubs or in drawing-rooms he prizes their attentions, and easily leaves his own set on any advances from theirs. In England, Sir Robert Peel and Thackeray are only two out of a manifold examples. I myself always fall an easy prey to superior manners. I remember how admirable in my youth were to me the Southern boys. Andrew Johnson won't look up to the planters as a superior race, cannot resist their condescensions and flatteries, and though he could not be frightened by them, falls an easy victim to their caresses. This result was explicitly foretold by Moncure D. Conway and Frederick Douglass. The remedy of this political mischief should be to train a youth in poverty to a nobler style of manners than any palace can show him, by Plato and Plutarch, by the Cid and Sidney and George Herbert and Chaucer. Quick people touch and go, whilst heavy people insist on pounding. 'Tis in vain to try to choke them off and change the conversation to avoid the slaughterhouse details. Straightway they begin at the beginning, and thrice they slay the slain. Society shall be distressing, and there's an end of it. Then here follows an untranslated quotation from George Sand. Criticism. Best masters for the young writer and speaker are the fault-finding brothers and sisters at home, who will not spare him, but will pick and cavil and tell the odious truth. As a side note, I'm pretty sure I've already read this before, so that's happened a few times where it seems like he's repeating certain things. I don't know if it's a repeat from other journal sections and he's accidentally double copying them, or means to do that if he's carrying one journal with him over another. I'm not sure. But these do almost verbatim repeat each other, which leads me to think he is writing them as he needs to remember them for something, and he has worded them in the way he wants. Education. He who betaketh him to a good tree hath good shade, for the Cid knew how to make a good knight, as a good groom knows how to make a good horse. Talk of Columbus or Newton. I tell you the babe just born in the hovel yonder is beginning of a revolution as great as theirs. I am far from thinking it late. I do not despond at all whilst I hear the verdicts of European juries against us. Renan says so and so. That does not hurt us at all. Arnold says thus or thus. Neither does that touch us. I think it safer to be so blamed than praised. Listen to every censure in good part. It does not hit the quick, since we do not wince. And if you do wince, that is best of all. Set yourself instantly to mend the fault, and thank the critic as your benefactor. And Ruskin has several rude and some ignorant things to say. University. But be sure that scholars are secured, that the scholar is not quite left out, that the imagination is cared for and cherished, that the money spirit does not turn him out, that enthusiasm is not repressed, and Professor Granny does not absorb all. Teach him Shakespeare, teach him Plato, and see that real examiners and awards are before you. In the college 'tis complained, money and the vulgar respectability have the same ascendant as in the city. What remedy? There is but one, namely, the arrival of genius, which instantly takes the lead and makes the fashion at Cambridge. Charles XII said to Swedenborg of the mathematics, "He who knew nothing of this science did not deserve to be considered a rational man." A sentiment, adds Swedenborg, worthy of a king. Koran. Paradise whose breadth equaleth the heavens and the earth. Hell is a circle about the unbelieving. Only the law of God it is which has no antecedent, and in which no change can be discovered. Sleeping are men, and when they die they wake. The saint's best blush in heaven is from his heart's blood red. Always falls on his feet. When one of Napoleon's favorite schemes missed, he had the faculty of taking up his genius, esprit, as he said, and of carrying it somewhere else. Saint Beuve. Ever since Pericles there has not been a young lover in all civil nations but has found his affection met and celebrated by the beautiful shining of the evening star. 'Tis everywhere the symbol of warm and tender joy, but does aught of that glorious and penetrating power belong to the planet itself, as known to the astronomer? I must read how Herschel or Leverrier, or whoever has best computed its elements, describes it. but I shall find it chaotic and uninhabitable for a human race. The poetic and moral enchantment is wholly subjective, we know. Editor's note. Beginning in the middle of April, Mr. Emerson was to give in Boston a series of lectures, Philosophy of the People. 1. 7 meters of intellect. 2. Instinct, perception, talent. 3. Genius, imagination, taste. 4. Laws of mind. 5. Conduct of intellect. 6. Relation of the intellect to morals. The extracts from M.L. Moral Law are mostly notes for these. A summary of this course may be found in the appendix to Cabot's memoir, Volume 2, pages 791 to 796. End note. March. Laws of the Mind. I have first to keep the promise of the last lecture by treating common sense, which one would say means the shortest line between 2 points, how to come at a practical end, and requires indispensably an act of your mind and not a quotation. But things are rarely seen by direct light, but only by the reflex light of others' opinion and culture, and a new opinion drawn from the thing itself is almost as astonishing as if, in the dark, the faces of our friends should become luminous and show by inward light. The following are called Laws of Mind. 1. Identity. One law consumes all diversity. 2. Flowing or transition, endless ascension. 3. Individualism or bias. I want the world, but on my terms. 4. Subjectiveness. All is as I am. 5. Detachment. Cell makes cell, and animal animal, and thought opens into thought. Dr. Johnson said, "To temperance every day is bright, and every hour propitious to diligence. A man can do anything if he will doggedly set himself at work to it," etc. Intellect. I have wandered, says Aunt Mary, into Brown's idea of knowing nothing of mind but thoughts. The celestial mind, incapable of offense, of haste, of care, of inhospitality, of peeping, of memory, incapable of embarrassment, of discourtesy, treating all with the sovereign equality. Aunt Mary wrote, "Religion, that home of genius, will strengthen the mind as it does the character." Immortality. As a proof of endless being, we make rank that novelty which perpetually attends life. On the borders of the grave, the hoary sage looks forward with an invariable elasticity of mind or hope. After millions of years, when on the verge of a new existence, for such is the nature of created existences to be forever new to life, etc. Aunt Mary's Letters. Van Helmont says, "The soul understands in peace and rest, and not in doubting." 'Tis the faith of Swedenborg and of Pascal that piety is an essential condition of science. I should like to know what power to believe in immortality any one could possess who had not already a revelation of it in the phenomena of intellect. Quote, "When the wind bloweth strong, hoist thy sail to the top. 'Tis joyous in storm not to flinch. Keep her full, none but cowards strike sail. Sooner founder than take in an inch." End quote. Code of the Vikings. March 26th. I often think of uses of an academy, though they did not rapidly appear when Sumner proposed his bill. And perhaps if it was national and must meet in Washington or Philadelphia, even New York would be a far-away place for me. Such benefits as I crave it could not serve. But today I should like to confide to a proper committee to report on what are called the Sentences of Zoroaster, or the Chaldaic Oracles, to examine and report on those extraordinary fragments, so wise, deep, some of them poetic, such riddles or so frivolous others, and pronounce shortly but advisedly what is their true history. Zoroaster has a line saying that violent deaths are friendliest to health of the soul. Attribute that among his good fortunes to Lincoln, and in the same connection remember the death of Pindar. Can identity be claimed for a being whose life is so often vicarious or belonging to an age or generation? He has fallen in another, he rises in another. Polarity. Every nature has its own. It was found that if iron ranged itself north and south, nickel or other substance ranged itself east and west. And Faraday expected to find that each chemic element might yet be found to have its own determination or pole, and every soul has a bias or polarity of its own, and each new, every one a magnet with a new north. Not Niebuhr only lost his power of divination, but every poet has on the hills counted the Pleiades and mourned his lost star. Ah, the decays of memory, of fancy, of the saliency of thought! Who would have not rather have a perfect remembrance of all he thought and felt in a certain high week than to read any book that has been published? When I read a good book, say one which opens a literary question, I wish that life were 3,000 years long. Who would not launch into this Egyptian history, as opened by Wilkinson, Champollion, Bunsen, but for the memento mori which he reads on all sides? Who was not provoked by the temptation of the Sanskrit literature? And as I wrote above, the Chaldaic oracles tempt me. But so also does algebra and astronomy and chemistry and geology and botany. Perhaps then we must increase the appropriation and write 30,000 years. And if these years have correspondent effect with the 60 years we have experienced, some earnest scholar will have to amend by striking out the word years and inserting centuries. It is plain that the war has made many things public that were once quite too private. A man searches his mind for thoughts and finds only the old commonplaces. But at some moment on the old topic of the days, politics, he makes a distinction he had not made. He discerns a little inlet not seen before. Where was a wall, now is a door. The mind goes in and out, and variously states in prose or poetry its new experience. It points it out to one and another, who of course deny the alleged discovery. But repeated experiments and affirmations make it visible soon to others. The point of interest is here, that these gates once opened never swing back. The observers may come at their leisure, and do at last satisfy themselves of the fact. The thought, the doctrine, the right hitherto not affirmed is published in set propositions, in conversation of scholars, and at last in the very choruses of songs. The young hear it, and as they have never fought it, never known otherwise, they accept it, vote for it at the polls, embody it in the laws. And this perception thus satisfied reacts on the senses to clarify them, so that it becomes more indisputable. Thus it is no matter what the opposition may be of presidents or kings or majorities, but what the truth is seen by one mind. I copy a scrap copy of my letter sent to Mrs. C.T. when in Europe, perhaps never sent, which I pick up today. Quote, I have let go the unreturning opportunity which your visit to Germany gave me to acquaint you with Gisela von Arnim and Hermann Grimm her husband, and Joachim the violinist, and I who prize myself only on my endurance that I am as good as new when the others are gone. I to be slow, derelict, and dumb to you in all your absence. I shall regret this as long as I live. How palsy creeps over us with gossamer first and ropes afterwards. And you have the prisoner when you have once put your eye on him, as securely as the bolts are drawn. How strange that Charles Newcome, whose secret you and I alone have, should come to write novels. Holmes's genius is all that is new, nor that to you. The worst is that we can do without it. Grand behavior is better if it rest on the axis of the world. Hegel seems to say, "Look, I have sat long gazing at all but imperceptible transitions of thought to thought, until I have seen with eyes the true boundary. I know what is this and that. I know it and have recorded it. It can never be seen but by a patience like mine, added to a perception like mine. I know the subtle boundary as surely as the mineralogist Huy knows the normal lines of his crystal and where the cleavage must begin. I know that all observation will justify me, and to the future metaphysician I say that he may measure the power of his perception by the degree of his accord with mine. This is the twilight of the gods predicted in the Scandinavian mythology." And as a side note to the listener, I feel like I have read this as well. There are several places in this last volume that I feel like I've already read these things in other volumes, and it's not noted that it is rewritten or anything else, but this portion specifically, I feel like I've read it before. But anyway, I'll keep going. Hegel's definition of liberty was the spirit's realization of itself. Hafitz can only show a playing with magnitudes, but without ulterior aim. Hafitz fears nothing, he sees too far, he sees throughout. American politics. I have the belief that of all things the work of America is to make the advanced intelligence of mankind and the sufficiency of morals practical, since there is on every side a breaking up of the faith and the old traditions of religion, and of necessity a return to the omnipotence of the moral sentiment, that in America this conviction is to be embodied in the laws and the jurisprudence, in international law and political economy. The lawyers have always some glaring exceptions to their statements of public equity, some reserve of sovereignty tantamount to the Rob Roy rule that might makes right. America should affirm and establish that in no instance should guns go in advance of the perfect right. You shall not make coup d'etat and afterwards explain and pay, but shall proceed like William Penn or whatever other Christian or humane person who treats with the Indian or foreigner on principles of honest trade and mutual advantage. Let us wait 1,000 years for the Sandwich Islands before we seize them by violence. Fame is ever righting itself. In the jangle of criticism, Goethe is that which the intelligent hermit supposes him to be, and can neither be talked up nor down. Beauty in life. It is peremptory for good living in houses in a cultivated age that the beautiful should never be out of thought. It is not more important that you should provide bread for the table than that it should be put there and used in a comely manner. You have often a right to be angry with servants, but you must carry your anger and chide without offense to beauty, else you have quarreled with yourself as well as with them. June 14th. But the surprise and dazzle of beauty is such that I thought today that if beauty were the rule instead of the exception, men would give up business. The following is from a loose sheet, it says. Thus lofty, thus universal is the principle which we call grace and nature, not lodged in certain lines or curves, not contained in color boxes or in rare and costly materials, but in every stroke in which it is found, presenting a kind of miniature of the world. Herein, in its central character, we see our concern in it. The perception of beauty is an office of the reason, and therefore all men have property in it. Deity. In the speed of conversation, L. said, "Poor God did all he could to make them so, but they steadily undid," etc. It recurs now as an example of the organic generalization. The speaker casts the apparent or hypothetical order of things into a word and names it God. But in the instant the mind makes the distinction or perceives the eternal and ever-present of the perfect, still whole and divine before him, and God quits the name of God and fills the universe as he did the moment before. Bias. 7 men went through a field, one after another. One was a farmer, he saw only the grass. The next was an astronomer, he saw the horizon and the stars. The physician noticed the standing water and suspected miasma. He was followed by a soldier who glanced over the ground, found it easy to hold, and saw in a moment how the troops could be disposed. Then came the geologist who noticed the boulders and the sandy loam. After him came the real estate broker who bethought him how the lines of the house lots should run, where and would be the driveway and the stables. The poet admired the shadows cast by some trees, and still more the music of some thrushes and a meadowlark. Editor's note. Some extracts attributed to Taliesin the Welsh bard precede this. End note. I suspect Walt Whitman had been reading these Welsh remains when he wrote his Leaves of Grass. Thus Taliesin sings, I am water, I am a wren, I am a workman, I am a star, I am a serpent, I am a cell, I am a chink, I am a depository of song, I am a learned person. Single speech poets. Hogg only wrote Kilmeny, Samson Reed, Genius, Forsyth Wilson, the Old Sergeant Ballad, Matthew Arnold, The Cirrus, S. Ferguson, Song of the Anchor, Wolfe, Burial of Sir John Moore, Rouget de Lisle, Marcier, Halleck, Marco Bozzaris, Messenger, Old Wine, Old Books, Henry Taylor, Philip van Artevelde, Daniel Webster, Speech against Hayne, Lord Cavernon, Speech on Lord Danby's Impeachment, Henry Kirke White, Herb Rosemary, Pollock, Oceana, W. C. Bryant, Waterfowl, George Borrow, Single Verse, and Sven Vonved, Raleigh, if soul's errand is taken, nothing is left but pilgrimage. Read Aunt Mary's manuscripts yesterday, many pages. They keep for me the old attraction, though when I sometimes have tried passages on a stranger, I find something of fairy gold. They need too much commentary, and are not as incisive as on me. They make the best example I have known of the power of the religion of the Puritans in full energy until 50 years ago in New England. The central theme of these endless diaries is her relation to the divine being, the absolute submission of her will, with the sole proviso that she may know it is the direct agency of God, and not of cold laws of contingency, etc., which bereaves and humiliates her. But the religion of the diary, as of the class it represented, is biographical. It is the culture, the poetry, the mythology, in which they personally believed themselves dignified, inspired, judged, and dealt with in the present and in the future. And it certainly gives to life an earnestness and to nature a sentiment which, lacking our later generation, appears frivolous. Editor's note. Mr. Emerson's son and daughter Ellen, one of their cousins, and some friends were camping on the rocky plateau of Monadnock for a week. Miss Keyes, daughter of Honorable John S. Keyes of Concord, later became Mrs. Edward W. Emerson. End note. July 2nd. I went with Annie Keyes and Mr. Channing on Wednesday, 27th of June, to Troy, New Hampshire, thence to the Mountain House in wagon, and with Edward and Tom Ward, who had come down to meet us, climbed the mountain. The party already encamped where Moorfield Story Ward and Edward for the men, and Una Hawthorne, Lizzie Simmons, and Ellen E. for the maidens. They lived on the plateau just below the summit, and were just constructing their one tent by spreading and tying Indian rubber blankets over a frame of spruce poles large enough to hold the four ladies with sleeping space and to cover the knapsacks. The men must find shelter, if need is, under the rocks. The mountain at once justified the party in their enthusiasm. It was romance enough to be there and behold the panorama and learn one by one all the beautiful novelties. The country below is a vast champaign, half cleared, half forest, with 40 ponds in sight, studded with villages and farmhouses, and all around the horizon closed with mountain ranges. The eye easily traces the valley followed by the Cheshire Railroad, and just beyond it the valley of the Connecticut River, then the Green Mountain chain. In the north the white hills can be seen, and on the east the low mountains of Watotic and Wachusett. We had hardly wanted our eyes to the new Olympus when the signs of a near storm set all the scattered party on alert. The tent was to be finished and covered and knapsacks piled in it. The wanderers began to appear on the heights and to descend, and much work in camp was done in brief time. I looked about for a shelter in the rocks, and not till the rain began to fall crept into it. I called to Channing and afterwards to Tom Ward, who came, and we sat substantially dry, if the seat was a little cold and the wall a little dripping, and pretty soon a large brook roared between the rocks, a little lower than our feet hung. Meantime the thunder shook the mountain, and much of the time was continuous cannonade. The storm refused to break up. One and another adventurer rushed out to see the signs, and especially the sudden torrents, little Niagaras that were pouring over the upper ledges and descending upon our plateau. But everybody was getting uncomfortably wet. The prospect was not good for the night, and in spite of all the remonstrance on the part of the young ladies, I insisted that they must go down with me to the mountain house for the night. All the 4 girls at last were ready and descended with Story and me, thus leaving the tent free to be occupied by Mr. Channing, Tom Ward, and Edward. The storm held on most of the night, but we were slowly drying and warming in the comfortable inn. Next day the weather slowly changed, and we climbed again the hill, and were repaid for all mishaps by the glory of the afternoon and evening. Edward went up with me to the summit, up all sorts of giant stairs, and showed the long spur with many descending peaks on the Dublin side. The rockwork is interesting and grand. The clean cleavage, the wonderful slabs, the quartz dikes, the rock torrents in some parts, the uniform presence on the upper surface of the glacial lines or scratches, all in one self-same direction. Then every glance below apprises you how you are projected out into stellar space, as a sailor on a ship bowsprit out into the sea. We look down here on 100 farms and farmhouses, but never see horse or man. For our eyes the country is depopulated. Around us the Arctic sparrow, Fringilla nivalis, flies and peeps, the ground robin also, but you can hear the distant song of the wood thrushes ascending from the green belts below. I found the picture charming and more than remunerative. Later, from the plateau at sunset, I saw the great shadow of Monadnock lengthen over the vast plain until it touched the horizon. The earth and sky filled themselves with all ornaments. Halos, rainbows, and little pendulums of cloud would hang down till they touched the top of a hill, giving it the appearance of a smoking volcano. The wind was north, the evening cold, but the campfire kept the party comfortable, whilst Story, with Edward for chorus, sang a multitude of songs to their great delectation. The night was forbiddingly cold. The tent kept the girls in vital heat, but the youths could hardly keep their blood in circulation, the rather that they had spared too many of their blankets to the girls and to the old men. Themselves had nothing for it but to rise and cut wood and bring it to the fire, which Mr. Channing watched and fed. And this service of fetching wood was done by Tom Ward once to his great peril during the night. In pitching a formless stump over into the ravine, he fell, and in trying to clear himself from the stump, now behind him, flying and falling, got a bad contusion. Editor's note. At commencement, Mr. Emerson received the degree of Doctor of Laws from Harvard University. End note. I see with joy the Irish immigrants landing at Boston, at New York, and say to myself, there they go, to school. Hazlitt, Lovelace's editor, says, Wither's song, Shall I, Wasting in Despair, is certainly superior to the song to Althea. I will instantly seek and read it. I have read it and find that of Lovelace much the best. There is this to be said in favor of drinking, that it takes the drunkard first out of society, then out of the world. The Turk is for the late centuries the sick man, and sick, it is said, from his use of tobacco, which the great Turks of Mohammed's period did not know. The scatterbrained tobacco, yet a man of no conversation should smoke. In classes of men, what a figure is Charles Lamb! So much wit lodged in such a saccharine temperament. What a saint is Milton! How grateful we are to the man of the world who obeys the morale as in humility, and in the obligation to serve mankind. True genius always has these inspirations. Humanity always equal to itself. The religious understand each other under all mythologies, and say the same thing. Homer and Aeschylus and all the rubbish of fables speak out clearly ever and anon the noble sentiments of all ages. Calvinism was as injurious to the justice as Greek myths were to the purity of the gods. Yet noble souls carried themselves nobly, and drew what treasures of character from that grim system. We want heat to execute our plans. What said Bettine to Goethe? Go to ruin with your sentiments. 'Tis the senses alone that work in art as in love, and nobody knows this better than you. I find it a great and fatal difference whether I court the muse or the muse courts me. That is the ugly disparity between age and youth. July 30th. This morn came again the exhilarating news of the landing of the Atlantic telegraph cable at Hart's Content, Newfoundland, and we repeat the old wonder and delight we found on the Adirondack in August 1858. We have grown more skillful, it seems, in electric machinery, and may confide better in a lasting success. Our political condition is better, and, though dashed by the treachery of our American president, can hardly go backwards to slavery and civil war. Besides, the suggestion of an event so exceptional and astounding in the history of human art is, that this instant and pitiless publicity, now to be given to every public act, must force on the actors a new sensibility to the opinion of mankind, and restrain folly and meanness. Old light polarized is much better than new. The indirect and reflex ray sometimes better than the direct. Quotation has its utilities. On a lower stage, see the history of quotation. Leave the great wheat countries, the Egypts and Mississippi valleys, and follow the harvest into the baker's shop and peddler's carts. When the Quakers settled in France in the early part of the French Revolution, asked of the National Assembly to be released from military duty, Mirabeau, president, replied, "The Assembly will in its wisdom consider your requests, but whenever I meet a Quaker, I shall say, 'My brother, if thou hast a right to be free, thou hast a right to prevent anyone from making thee a slave. As thou lovest thy fellow creature, suffer not a tyrant to destroy him. It would be killing him thyself.'" The hero of the Dacias, armed with his club, rushed against Nisrima, but, like the insect which falls in the fire, the Asura disappeared, absorbed by the splendor of his enemy. Bhagavad Purana. What fanatics in politics we are! There are far more important things than free suffrage, namely, a pure will, pure and illumined. August 12th. Last night in conversation with New York ladies, Alcott appeared to great advantage, and I saw again, as often before, his singular superiority. As pure intellect, I have never seen his equal. The people with whom he talks do not even understand him. They interrupt him with clamorous dissent or what they think verbal endorsement of what they fancy he may have been saying, or with, "Do you know, Mr. Alcott, I think thus and so." Some whim or sentimentalism, and do not know that they have interrupted his large and progressive statement, do not know that all they have in their baby brains is spotty and incoherent, that all that he sees and says is like astronomy, lying there real and vast, and every part, in fact, in eternal connection with the whole, and that they ought to sit in silent gratitude, eager only to hear more, to hear the whole, and not to interrupt him with their prattle. It is because his light is so clear, commanding the whole ground, and he is perfectly gifted to state adequately what he sees, that he does not lose his temper when his glib interlocutors bore him with their dead texts and phrases. Another, who sees in flashes or only here and there a landmark, has the like confidence in his own truth and in the infinitude of the soul, but none in his competence to show it to the bores, and if they tease him, he is silent. Power is not pettish, but want of power is. Alcott's activity of mind is shown in the perpetual invention and felicity of his language, the constitutionality of his thought, apparent in the fact that last night's discourse only brought out with new conviction the old fundamental thoughts which he had when I first knew him. The moral benefit of such a mind cannot be told. The world fades, men, reputations, politics shrivel, the interests, power, future of the soul beam a new dayspring. Faith becomes sight. Maya, illusion of the Hindus. Rudra says, O thou, who always unalterable createst, conservest, and destroyest this universe by the aid of Maya, that energy in numerous forms, which, powerless when it reposes in thy bosom, makes believe that it is distinct from thee, and gives to the world an apparent reality. Bhagavad Purana, Volume 2, page 127. Maya. The assistant said, In the road of birth, where is no shelter, which great miseries make difficult, where the god of death presents himself as a frightful reptile, where they have before their eyes the mirage of objects, where the opposite affections of pleasure and pain are precipices, where they fear the wicked as ferocious beasts, where grief is like a fire in the forest. How should a caravan of ignorant beings, loaded with the heavy burden of the body and the soul, tormented by desire, how, O God, who givest asylum, should it ever arrive at thy feet? The Veda says, the world is born of Maya, and then there's an untranslated French quotations, I believe, from the Maya or Bhagavad Purana. There is a maxim which those who know the Veda repeat in all places, this: an action done in conformity to the law becomes invisible and does not reappear. Equivalent this to Novalis' saying, of the wrong we are always conscious, of the right, never. William Forbes writes wisely, difficulties exist to be surmounted, a right heroic creed. Gifts. Flowers grow in the garden to be given away. Everybody feels that they appeal to finer senses than his own, and looks wistfully around in hope that possibly this friend or that may be nobler furnished than he to see and read them, or at least a better naturalist. Especially they are sent to ceremonies and assemblies, sacred or festal or funeral, because on occasions of passion and sentiment there may be a higher appreciation of these delicate wonders. August 31st. Visited Agassiz by invitation with Lydian and Ellen, and spent the day at his house and on the Nahant rocks. He is a man to be thankful for, always cordial, full of facts, with unsleeping observation, and perfectly communicative. In Brazil he saw on a half-mile square 117 different kinds of excellent timber, and not a sawmill in Brazil. A country thirsting for Yankees to open and use its wealth. In Brazil is no bread, manioca in pellets the substitute, at the side of your plate. No society, no culture, could only name three men, the Emperor, M. Coutinho, and M. Couteau. For the rest, immense vulgarity, and as Longfellow said, the Emperor wished he could swap places with Agassiz and be a professor, which Agassiz explained thus, that the Emperor said, now you, when you leave your work, can always return into cultivated society. I have none. Agassiz says the whole population is wretchedly immoral, the color and features of the people showing the entire intermixing of all the races. Mrs. Agassiz found the women ignorant, depressed, with no employment but needlework, with no future, negligent of their persons, shabby and sluttish at home, with their hairs about their ears, only gay in the ballroom, the men well dressed. I can find my biography in every fable that I read. In the history of intellect, no more important fact than the Hindu theology, teaching that the beatitude or supreme good is to be attained through science, namely by the perception of the real and unreal, setting aside matter and qualities and affections or emotions and persons and actions as mayas or illusions, and thus arriving at the contemplation of the one eternal life and cause, and a perpetual approach and assimilation to him, thus escaping new births or transmigration. Truth is the principle and the moral of the Hindu theology. Truth as against the Maya which deceives gods and men. Truth the principle, and retirement and self-denial the means of attaining it. And they stop at no extreme in the statement. Nobility. The extreme example of the sentiment on which the distinction of rank rests is not to be found in Spain, Germany, or England, but in India, where poverty and crime do not interrupt or diminish the reverence for a Brahmin. In India, a Brahmin may be very poor and perform daily menial tasks for the English as porters or servants, but the natives still kneel to him and show him the highest respect. Mr. Dahl testified this fact to me on his return from India. Self-respect always commands. I see it here in a family little known, that each of whose members, without other gifts or advantages above the common, have that, in lieu of all, teaching that wealth, fashion, learning, talent, garden, fine house, servants can be omitted if you have quiet determination to keep your own way with good sense and energy. The best of it is that the family I speak of do not suspect the fact. Anquetil Duperon. What a counterpart to all the bohemianism we attribute to Parisian littérateurs is the address of Anquetil Duperon to the Indian Brahmins. Louis XVI sent one to Anquetil Duperon with 3,000 francs in a leathern bag. His friend set it down beside the chimney and departed. As soon as he was gone, Anquetil snatched it up, ran out, and threw it at the heels of his friend, who found the bag arrived at the bottom of the staircase before him. The Society of Public Instruction later voted him a pension of 6,000 francs. Anquetil returned the order, saying he had no need of it. When very near his end, he said to his physician, "I am going to set out on a voyage much more considerable than all those I have already made, but I do not know where I shall arrive." The year 1866 has its memorabilia in the success of Atlantic Cable, in the downfall of Austria, in the checking of Napoleon and of Maximilian, in Agassiz's South American science, shall I say in the possession taken by the American government of the telegraph and the postal service, for I thought a public statement meant that. The promise of literature amazes, for none reads in a book in a happy hour without suggestion of immensities on the right hand and on the left, without seeing that all recorded experience is a drop of dew before the soliciting universe of thought. Thought is more ductile than gold, more expansive than hydrogen gas. Nations live on one book, and in active states, one thought, one perception discloses endless possibilities. It is ever as the attention, as the activity of the mind, and not as the number of the thoughts or sensations that the result is. Egypt. Know that the gods hate impudence. Inscription on the Temple of Sais. A poem in praise of Ramses II says of the tower which he built, "The sunlight beams in its horizon and sets within it." The Nile coming all along the heaven. Hafetz's poetry is marked by nothing more than his habit of playing with all magnitudes, mocking at them. What is the moon or the sun's course or heaven, and the angels to his darling mole or eyebrow? Destiny is a scurvy night thief who plays him or her a bad trick. I might and perhaps will collect presently a few examples, though as I remember they occur passum in the divan. but I am always struck with the fact that mind delights in measuring itself thus with matter, with history. A thought, any thought, pressed, followed, opened, dwarfs nature, custom, and all but itself. The fancy carries out all the sentiments into form, and makes angels in the sky, and organizes remorse into a judgment day, and the universe at court, and so we have painted out our heaven and hell. But I do not know but the sad realist has an equal or better content in keeping his hard nut. He sees the eternal symmetry, the world persisting to be itself, the unstooping morals of nature, and says, I can trust it. There is no fancy in my innate, uniform, essential perception of right, unique though million-formed or faced. Through all process, through all enemies, the result is benefit, beauty. The aim is the best. I can well omit this parish propensity of casting it in small, in creeds, in punch pictures, as the popular religions do, into Westminster catechisms, Athanasian creeds, Egyptian, Christian, Mohammedan, or Hindu paradises and hells. I will not be the fool or fancy, nor a child with toys. The positive degree is manly, and suits me better. The truth is stranger and grander than the gayest fable. I cling to astronomy, botany, zoology, as read by the severe intellect, and will live and die assured that I cannot go out of power and deity which rule in all my experience, whether sensuous or spiritual. Fame. I confess there is sometimes a caprice in fame, like the unnecessary eternity given to these minute shells and antediluvian fishes, leaves, ferns, yea, ripples and raindrops, which have come safe down through a vast antiquity, with all its shocks, upheavals, deluges, and volcanoes, wherein everything noble in art and humanity had perished. Yet these snails, periwinkles, and worthless dead leaves come staring imperfect into our daylight. What is fame, if every snail or ripple or raindrop shares it? It were good under the head of greatness to collect signal examples of those high steps in character by which a good greatness is dwarfed in the presence of a higher strain, and this again by another. Aunt Mary's History and Letters would give many suggestions, such as her definition of fame, her confidence that she would, in spite of all failures, know one day what true friendship is, for the love of superior virtue is mine own gift from God. Again, that greatest of all gifts, however small my power of receiving, the capacity, the element to love, the all-perfect, without regard to personal happiness, happiness 'tis itself. All greatness is in degree, and there's more above than below. Thus what epic greatness in Dante's heaven and hell, revealing new powers in the human mind. What majestic power again in Swedenborg's heaven and hell. What again in the popular Calvinism of the last 2 centuries. Each of these war against the other. Now read the Indian theory. As to heaven and hell, they are inventions of Maya and are therefore both imaginary, etc. It costs nothing to a commander to command, and everybody, the most powerful, finds himself some time also in the hands of his commander. It may be a woman or a child or a favorite, but usually it is another man organically so related to you that he easily impresses and leads your will, neutralizes your superiorities. Perhaps has less general ability than his victim, but is superior where the victim is weak, and most desires to be strong. But this locally stronger man has his dragon also, who flies at his throat and so gives the first revenges. Thus everyone has his master, and no one is stronger than all the others. Dr. Jackson said he was at Pulpit Rock, Lake Superior, when he heard music, like rhythmical organ or vocal chanting, and believed it to come from some singers. But going on a little further, it ceased. In another direction heard it again, and by perceived that it was the beating of the waves on the shore deprived of its harshness by the atmosphere. He has never seen this subject treated scientifically, he thinks, except in a paper on sound by Dr. Vol.10. September. My idea of a home is a house in which each member of the family can on the instant kindle a fire in his or her private room. Otherwise, their society is compulsory and wasteful to the individual. There may be 2 or 3 or 4 steps according to the genius of each, but for every seeing soul there are 2 absorbing facts: I and the abyss. September 15th. I think the preacher had better first secure his acre and his independence. Then let him know that the secrets are all disclosed in the household talk. Let him know that in every act and expression of men he can divine all the logical sequences or concomitants. Speak the affirmative, which is always good. Then you lose no time. You grow whether the deacons like you or not, and are presently in a position to dictate to them and to the people. The old Psalms and Gospels, mighty as ever, showing that what people call religion is literature. This man knew how to put his statement, and the people said, "Thus saith the Lord." Men and women. Man's conclusions are reached by toil. Woman arrives at the same by sympathy. He studies details, she catches by instinct the character. I suppose women feel about men who huddle them aside in the press as geniuses feel about the energetic workers, namely, that they see through these noisy masters. In the company of superior women, we all know that we are overlooked, judged, and sometimes sentenced. They are better scholars than we, and if not now, yet better 20 years later. Their organic share is education. They are by sympathy and quickness the right mediators between those who have knowledge and those who want it. Man is a rude bear when men are separated in ships, in mines, in colleges, and monasteries. Conversation descends, manners are coarse. Let women sail as passengers, and all is righted. Taste, beauty, order, grace. Life is respectable, and has elevated aims. Now she has been rightly drawn into interest in missions and various humanities, and at last the putting an end to slavery. Woman could not refuse to take part. That organization in this country was, you know, an education. The executive committee was composed of men and women, and continued so until the end was reached. One truth leads in another. That cause was an education, a university, and it compelled a constant inquisition into human rights. And woman has learned to ask for all her rights, and that of the vote. 'Tis the right remedy at the right moment. Every truth leads in another truth. As Parry, as others in their several explorations in the Arctic came out each on the sea, so the independent thinkers like Bayman, like Spinoza, came out each on an adamantine necessity. The theories of the students were weathercocks, but this inevitable result was final. The progress of invention is really a threat. Whenever I see a railroad, I look for a republic. We must take care to induct free trade and abolish custom houses before the passenger balloons begin to arrive from Europe, and I think the railroad superintendent has a second and deeper sense when he inscribes his legend over the ways. Look out for the engine. The unexpected. Wealth is chiefly convenient for emergencies. Day by day, every family gets well enough through its common routine, the poor as the rich. Only now and then comes a pinch, a sudden and violent call for means, as a marriage or a sickness or a visitor or a journey or a subscription that must be met. Then it is fortunate and indispensable to have new power. But emergencies are in the contract. They will and must occur to every susceptible person. Therefore you must set your daily expense at the famine pitch, live within your income all the year round, to be ready with your dollars for these occasions. October 12th. To writers. If your subject does not appear the flower of the world at this moment, you have not yet rightly got it. Every word in the language has once been used happily. The ear caught by that felicity retains it. October 24th. Dreams. I have often experienced, and again last night in my dreams, the surprise and curiosity of a stranger or indifferent observer to the trait or to the motive of information communicated. Thus, some refractory youth, of whom I had some guidance or authority, expressed very frankly his dissent and disliked my way of laughing. I was curious to understand the objection, and endeavored to penetrate and appreciate it, and of course with the usual misfortune that when I woke and attempted to recover the specification, which was remarkable, it was utterly forgotten. But the fact that I, who must be the author of both parts of the dialogue, am thus remote and inquisitive in regard to one part, is ever wonderful. October 25th. Success in your work, the finding a better method, the better understanding that ensures the better performing, is hat and coat, is food and wine, is fire and horse, and health and holiday. At least I find that any success in my work has the effect on my spirits of all these. What his right hand achieveth. I like my neighbor T.'s manners. He has no deference, but a good deal of kindness, so that you see that his good offices come from no regard for you, but purely from his character. I don't know, but I value the name of a thing, that is, the true poet's name for it, more than the thing. If I can get the right word for the moon, or about it, the word that suggests to me and to all men its humane and universal beauty and significance, then I have what I want of it, and shall not desire that a road may be made from my garden to the moon, or that the gift of this elephant be made over to me. Cunning egotism. If I cannot brag of knowing something, then I brag of not knowing it. At any rate, brag. Teresa made herself useful and indispensable to all her neighbors as well as inmates by being always in possession of a matchbox, an awl, a measuring tape, a mucilage pot, a corkscrew, microscope, reading glass, and opera glass. The Negro, thanks to his temperament, appears to make the greatest amount of happiness out of the smallest capital. This is the end of Journal Collection number 57, dating from the year 1866, when the author was 63 years old. Thank you for listening.